data that's in there, but in fact, they're full of errors, they're full of typos, and in some cases, in some very scary proportion of those cases, the typos actually flip the results. So if you corrected the typo, the result would no longer be statistically significant, for instance. So these are quite scary findings as well. And another thing that scientists like to do, of course, if they've definitely not made a mistake, they don't want to muck about with the results, there's no fraud involved, but they still want to claim that they found a result, is that they can spin their results, right? So they can add spin to their paper to make it sound like they've found something when in fact they haven't. And this is something you have to look out for when you're reading scientific papers, because there's an awful lot of spin goes on. There's no one actually really stopping you from spinning your results. So here's, when you find a result that isn't statistically significant, so that p-value that scientists use, they want the p-value to be lower than 0.05, and that means that the result is statistically significant. You've encountered this phrase, I'm sure, many times. But when it isn't statistically significant, here are some of the genuine phrases that scientists have used to make it sound like the result is significant. A trend that approached significance. A trend significance level. Narrowly eluded statistical significance, barely escaped statistical significance, fairly significant, significantly significant, hovering close to significance, all but significant, approaching marginal significance, very closely brushed the limit of statistical significance, and my favorite, which is not absolutely significant, but very probably so. Now, these are all ways of saying, we haven't found the result we want, but I want to write it as if I want to convince you that there is actually something there, when in fact there isn't, right? And we think of scientists as being like super objective, right? But actually, this clearly shows the opposite. I'm going to skip this on just to say that they often make mistakes in press releases. So when they're putting results out into the world, they often hype up their results beyond what the data can actually show. And I don't like to name names necessarily, but here are 3 examples of books by very prestigious professors at top universities in the US, who I think in all these cases there is a kernel of truth to what they claim, right? It's not that these are made up or completely wrong, but they're hyped up so that some interesting finding is made to sound as if it's the most important thing ever, rather than just something that's interesting and worth discussing, right? So there's an awful lot of hype, even at the very highest levels of academia, or perhaps even more so at the highest levels of academia. And this just puts it all together. This is an amazingly dispiriting figure from a study where they looked at the number of papers that had positive and negative results in trials of antidepressant drugs. So that's on the very left-hand side there. You can see that there were about half the studies were red, they had negative results, and about half the studies were green, had positive results. And almost all the positive results got published in a journal, but only half of the negative results did, right? So already we're not seeing half of the trials that showed that the antidepressant drug didn't work. So we're already getting a distorted view of what the real evidence shows. In many of the cases, when they found a negative result, the scientists just switched it to a different thing. So they were planning on analyzing this particular measure of depression, but then they just changed it to another one because it didn't show the result they wanted. So you're having these questionable research practices. This also shows that in many of the cases, even when they found a negative result, they wrote it up as if it was positive. So they spun it to sound more positive. And then the final insult to injury at the end is that the studies that were positive were cited much more by other scientists than the ones that were negative, right? So we're obsessed with positive findings. We're obsessed with finding exciting results that show that we're well on our way to dealing with depression or whatever it is. But actually, the reality can be quite different. If you see right from the very beginning what the science actually looks like, and then what we see when we read the scientific literature. Okay, just a few points to kind of finish that off. My friend Zach Wintersmith made a comic from when my book came out. He made a comic of my. This is meant to be me talking about science and stuff. And there's a whole long comic strip that you can get at that link, and it's all it's quite a fun summary. The reason that this is happening is not because science is wrong, not because the scientific method is wrong, not because the scientific process is wrong, but because of academia and to some extent industry. But the places that we do science push us away from actually getting correct results and push us towards fraud, bias, negligence, and hype. That's my thesis. That's the thesis that I put forward in my book, Science Fictions, which I forgot to put on any of these slides, but it's available at all good bookshops. And a lot of the problem is these journals, right? To go back to these journals that I mentioned before. Hyping up your findings to try and get them into the top journals, try and catch the eye of editors. You know, in some cases, making up your findings from scratch because you desperately want to get these publications. Sometimes your job requires you to get lots and lots of these publications, right? So you get people churning out endless low-quality papers just to keep their job. You get people fabricating or falsifying results in order to get into the higher impact, as they're called, journals, so that they can get a promotion or become more famous, well known in science. It's not good for science. Might be good for your individual career, but it's not good for science. So just a very, very brief run through some of the things journals are doing. I have seen some progress. That's been a gloomy picture that I've painted so far, but I have seen some progress in the last 10 years. A lot of journals are now adopting these kind of ideas. They're requiring people to publish their data online, make their data open, right? And if you've falsified your data, maybe you don't want to publish it online, so that's a way of deterring fraudsters by making them publish all their data online. Pre-registering the study, I'll come back to that in just a moment. Doing replication studies and so on. A lot of journals that used to say we don't like replication studies, after having seen all the problems that I just described, are now actually saying we're interested in replication studies sometimes. There's this really interesting graph from a paper quite a few years ago, but it was remade recently on the Our World in Data website, which shows that after registration was brought in for certain clinical trials, so after you had to say what analyses you were doing, it stops you from mucking about with the data, stops you from playing around and just finding any old thing in the data. After registration, mysteriously, studies that were getting positive results all the time started getting null results, started getting results that were not statistically significant. And it's probably the case, and this, by the way, is also the case in psychology, where when you write down your plan, you're much less likely to get those positive results. And it implies to me that getting positive results is something that comes about when you don't have a plan and you can just satisfy yourself by mucking around in the data. There's now websites like the Open Science Framework where you can post your data, you can register your study, you can update your registrations, you can do all sorts of different things. Now, the technology that's available now online makes it vastly easier to make your research transparent and open in ways that you just couldn't do 10 years ago. And these are very simple websites, repositories, and so on, and they're becoming better used in many different fields of research. You don't need to be super high tech, you just need to make the technology accessible to people. There are journals appearing that are changing their practices. There are journals, first of all, that are studying the kind of stuff that I've talked about in this talk. So they're doing meta-science, or meta-psychology, meta-research, science about science, so we understand the ways that it can go wrong and the ways that we can fix it. And there are journals that are changing the way that they accept papers, changing the way that they publish research in order to make it open, transparent, and to stop a lot of these dodgy things that happen behind the scenes from occurring. And I'm optimistic that it really could make a difference. There are also lots of organizations that are getting together where people are talking about open science, open data, open access, open research, and improving the quality of our research. These are just a few examples from the UK and the US. So the discussion is happening about this stuff, and this is what we're doing right here. We're talking about these issues. And just one final thing, which is to say, you don't have to. I really want to underline that I'm not attacking science here. I'm not saying, oh, you don't have. let's not believe in the vaccine trials or something because science is dodgy. Not at all, not at all. The vaccine trials were actually done avoiding a lot of these problems because they were very transparent. They knew that they would get extreme scrutiny, right? So they were very, very transparent. So by following the sorts of things I'm talking about, they actually managed to do a great job. So you don't need to drop your interest in science or start mistrusting science. Everyone just has to raise their standards. And that's what I've been arguing for today. So thank you very much for listening. Feel free to get in touch. I'm happy to share these slides. Thank you once again. Thanks. I think I have time for some questions if anyone wants to ask. Yeah.
Shukran. Thank you very much, Professor Ritchie, for fascinating
Thank you.
Thoughts and based on substance and science. First of all, I come from industry. My name is Walid Hussein. I'm from the Saudi Arabian oil company, Saudi Aramco. But I've been, because of the virtue of the work I'm doing, I'm engaged with academia and research centers all the time. Exactly, you explained it perfectly. We see that researchers, scientists, faculty members, their focus is on publication. And that's worldwide, whether it's in the, this part of the world, or the UK, or in the North America. The number one priority when it goes to academia is number of publications, then patents and what have you. Yep. So the concern that I found from your presentation, what academia could do to instill the spirit of ethics, integrity, and making sure that the credibility that the academic sector and the research enterprises have gained through centuries will not be shattered with regrettable practices that some of the members of this community acts on. The concern is this. So you have young generation who are going into research in different disciplines and bodies of knowledge. And you want to instill in them that kind of ethics and integrity to make sure that when they consider for academic promotions and opportunities, that ethics and integrity is indispensable for their career progression, and they are doing disfavor for themselves and the research enterprises they belong to, and in fact the entire sector that might have. So what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question, and I think it has lots and lots of different answers. So I think it has answers from the bottom up. So we're, as a community of scientists, people are much more aware of these issues now, and they're talking about them. You look at social media, scientists are discussing these kind of things and saying, was this paper pre-registered and blah, so they're talking about these kind of techniques from the bottom up. As I say, they're building these, we're building these organizations like we have a, even just thinking on the very local level, in our department, we have a kind of open science club where there's a talk each week from someone who talks about, ways to make your data more open. So that's the bottom up. But there's also top-down things that need to happen. So I mentioned that some of these journals are changing the way they publish papers. That's one thing. But as you suggested, I think universities could do a lot more to change this. So hiring practices, instead of being based on, how many papers did you publish in the last year, or how much grant income did you bring in the last year, we could downweight that stuff and instead upweight your general contributions to the scientific literature. Did you do a replication study? Did you produce a tool that helps people make their research more robust in some way? Did you create a data set that you've shared with people? Whatever it is. I mean, I think we want to be more pluralistic about what we consider a contribution to the scientific literature, and not just publication, publication, publication all the time. So that's one thing. I think funders also play a role. So instead of saying, we're going to fund your research and we want you to make sure that you publish it in Nature or Science or whatever. Instead, we want to make sure that you publish it in an open way, that you have the data online for other people to check, that you share your results, that you share the statistical code that you wrote to analyze the results, whatever it is. So I think there's bottom-up and top-down ways. Some of them will work better than others, and I think just having this conversation is part of it. Just you and I talking about this, whatever. People being more aware of it. And I also think there's social pressures that we could have. Like, I just think we don't like to say it. It's not a very nice thing to say, but shaming people who do bad practices with their data, especially fraudsters. I mean, they're shamed obviously enough, but there are people whose research maybe blends into fraud, or certainly people who hype up way beyond the data. I think we could do more in criticizing them and being going back to the kind of ideal of science, which is that we're unafraid to criticize anything that goes against the data at any given time. So lots of different answers to the question, and I think we're going to need to deal with them all if we're going to really make some progress on this. Yeah?
I'm a researcher. So basically, I would like to ask is, I mean, that's a good question what the Aranco gentleman asked. We should encourage people to also say that this research is not coming to the expectations we had.
Yes.
So if that is allowed, then it doesn't matter. Because you're looking, you have a hypothesis, you're working both sides of the hypothesis. Someone agrees, someone disagrees with the justification.
Yes.
And the replicacy can be not just a replicacy, because the sample is different. So it's actually a new one.
Yep.
Especially in psychology, if I have a different sample and I do everything same, it is a different result. It's a new research, in fact, according to me. So these are some of the additions I just wanted to comment.
Yeah. No, I think the first part of what you said, I totally agree. At the moment, you view this thing, this publication, and it's this sort of standalone. Oh, right, we've got to be quick. Yeah. You view it as this standalone thing where it's the end. It's the end of the process. You've published your paper. That's it, and it's really difficult to do a correction or sometimes a retraction on that. If we use technology to instead have papers that were kind of living documents that you update sometimes, and new data sometimes comes in and it alters what we think, I feel like we would have a more healthy attitude to errors and making mistakes and just admitting that things didn't turn out the way we wanted. And I also think that journals, there's this idea of a registered report, right, which is instead of writing your paper and sending it to a journal, you plan your study and then send it to a journal, and then the journal says, if we agree that this is a good enough methodology, we'll publish it regardless of the result. And I think that's a revolution in the way that we publish science. So I would encourage anyone to look that up. Registered reports, they're called. Lots of journals are doing that now. And it's kind of obvious to me that that's how we should be doing science. The journal should want the paper not on the basis of its results, but on its methodology. And I think that would make a huge difference. So yeah, thank you for that. I think we're out of time. So thanks very much again for listening. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stewart. We're going to be stopping for a break, a 10 minutes break, and then we'll be back for the fourth session at 2:30. طبعا رح نتوقف مع استراحة سريعة لمدة 10 دقائق ورح نرجع على الساعة 2:30 للجلسة الرابعة. شكرا.
introduce you from here, me. Then I'll give you the floor. You come here, and then I go back to my, and then we. And I will just present the speaker before you take the floor. I will not present everybody, and then. This I prefer better for the audience to know really who's talking now and what's the background. Because they forget. Okay. Sure, I will not keep it. Sorry. I've done it once in Expo. No, I cannot keep it. Will you?
This is already on. Will you leave this here? Is that
No,
yours?
me, I will read from the paper quickly. First, we'll have here, I will welcome, and then Philip will present, then Nicole will present, and then Bashar will sit all together and ask him, like, address for him key questions, and he will have the floor, and then we'll open the floor for question. Will be here, yeah.
But then that means that we will have a microphone, like
Yeah.
a carryable, deportable one. Okay.
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 Can, yeah.
Can I maybe put this here then? Okay.
We can maybe take
Yeah, that would be cool.
this out if they don't want.